Welcome to Chapter 2, a very brief history of AI. In this chapter, we're going to cover rule-based automation and the transformation to machine learning and ultimately to large language models. We're going to look at the breakthroughs and impact that those had on finance teams. We're going to cover why we're seeing accelerated growth in AI use and adoption today. And then we're going to cover, is all of this hype? How do we bring this back to reality? So with that, let's jump in. So we're taking a look at the timeline here and going back to the 1980s to the early 2000s, where we were seeing a lot of rule-based workflow engines that were really laying the foundation for RPA that we'll talk about in a moment. This was, if this, then that logic. Rigid and inflexible, but it works. Now, practical application of rule-based workflows includes things like reconciliations, setting up hosting rules, and approval routing. To use an analogy for rule-based workflow engines that we're all familiar with, think of these systems as the dirt roads that we sometimes use to drive on. They're useful, they're predictable, but they only function when all of the paths are clearly defined. Now let's fast forward to the early 2000s and 2010s when RPA came in. RPA stands for Robotic Process Automation. And this is, a process that essentially mimics human clicks, keystrokes, and other user interface interactions on their computers, similar to macros in many ways. RPA automates structured, repetitive, rule-based tasks. To be more specific for finance, think about processes where we're downloading data from a source system or making specific updates to a report each and every month. Maybe we're doing that in spreadsheets. Or maybe we need to reference data from one system and record it in another. RPA can support that as well. So to use that same automotive analogy, think of RPA as setting cruise control in your vehicle. So it's very good at doing one specific task, and it's going to work great unless something unexpected happens. It's not context aware. It does not understand the environment around it, and it does not play well in that scenario. Fast forwarding to the 2010s and the introduction of machine learning and predictive analytics. At a very high level, this technology is where systems learn patterns based upon reviewing historical data. So practical application here, really the obvious one within finance, is forecasting. So that was really introduced, this idea of predictive analytics and tying it in to the work that finance and FP&A teams are doing today. It's also great at anomaly detection, even looking at things like fraud scoring and transaction tagging as well. So the idea that transactions are coming into a system and based upon predefined criteria, the system can tag those transactions. But then, emphasis on the learning piece of machine learning. Learn from past mistakes where you, the human, have corrected suggestions that it's made. So now let's get into the fun stuff. In the 2020s, we're talking about deep learning and large language models. And these models learn by name. They are large from enormous data sets, and they're able to interpret natural language, hence the idea of natural language processing, or NLP, as well as all sorts of documents and images. It's not just text. Now, LLMs are very good at condensing large quantities of information and turning them into clear outputs while keeping all of the meaning intact. Practical application of these includes flux analysis, commentary, drafting of policies, where you have large documents, the ability to condense those into the cliff notes, and really just a good thought partner for idea generation. An analogy here for this technology would be your GPS-enabled vehicles. They're adaptive, they're context-aware as their environment around them changes, they can plan and execute routes, but ultimately They still need a human behind the wheel. And now bringing it to today, and we're talking about agentic AI. And at a high level, we're looking at the ability to create autonomous task chains. In other words, the ability for the agent to operate multiple steps in a process without the need for a human being directly involved. Practical application includes running a reconciliation, but end to end. The ability to extract the data, compare the data, identify differences in that reconciliation, and then propose journal entry adjustments that may be necessary from that comparison. It can match payments to invoices automatically. It can take that bank feed and apply the cash based upon some predefined logic. It can perform cash flow updates by aggregating bank feeds, by identifying differences, physically updating the forecast, and then, of course, where you want the human in the loop, and we'll touch on that a bit later, the ability to notify the Treasury team when changes are made so that those can be reviewed after the fact. Now, you might have guessed the analogy here, but think of agentic AI as the self-driving, autonomous vehicles that can reroute without human intervention. Now I just want to show you guys a quick quote to remember. This quote comes from Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Motor Company. And Henry said, "If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses." So Henry's really giving us a different perspective here. And the way that I'm thinking about it is that AI is truly innovative and transformational. And without people like Henry thinking outside the box and not just reacting to what people have asked for, we wouldn't be where we are today. It's really a good reminder for all of us to be experimental as we work through the remainder of this training program. And speaking of being experimental, let's discuss some of the recent breakthroughs and how these have impacted finance teams and treasury teams alike. So some of the modern breakthroughs that we have seen. Transformer architecture was introduced around 2017. This is where models can understand large volumes of text and documents, and more importantly, relate the components of those documents together. It doesn't read like a human from right to left or left to right, but processes everything in parallel. We also have the flexibility now with cheap compute, especially in the cloud. We have more power. We have lower cost from providers that you may be aware of, like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, just to name a few. We now have multimodal capabilities. So what does that mean? Really, it means different types of content, text, files, spreadsheets, images, PDFs, and the ability to work with all of those different content types within a single workflow, not just interpreting text. Early AI could really only function with text. It's come a long way since then. So this was a game changer, especially for finance and treasury teams who live in spreadsheets, are working with large PDF files, whether that be invoices, whether that be contracts, whether that be policies. Huge application for our finance and treasury teams. And then, as we just saw more recently, agent frameworks. The ability to have these models take action, not just provide answers. So what does this mean for our finance and treasury teams? It means we can close the books faster. We can have automated flux explanations, reconciliations, the handling of exceptions. We now have cash flow intelligence as you think about real-time forecasting and flagging internal and external signals to support that. We have treasury automation as you think about ingesting data directly from our banks, matching those transactions, creating alerts, and comparing balances and transactions against policies that we've set in place. We have the ability to support decision making. We can prepare CFO-ready insights. We can scenario models, so look at high, medium, and low cases, what-if analysis, and the commentary to support that. It supports risk detection as we look at anomalies in payments that we're making or journal entries that perhaps look out of the norm. We can look at large liquidity swings to bring it back to Treasury for a second. And then we have AI copilots, and I want to take a moment to talk about these. AI copilots are great. A good use case would be onboarding a new team member and guiding them through your standard operating procedures, which will be bespoke and specific to your company. Also, the ability to answer finance policy questions, and again, these may be very specific to your organization. The thing that I want to flag is that they're often referred to as chatbots. If someone's talking about chatbots in 2025, they're likely talking about AI copilots. Chatbots can answer questions, and that's great, but copilots can analyze and complete multi-step processes. So to bring it back to an analogy, I think of, someone calling a copilot a chatbot is like calling a Tesla a golf cart. They're very similar in that they have wheels, and that's about where that similarity ends. Now we're going to talk about why are we seeing accelerated growth in AI and adoption of AI today. Starting with data availability. We have seen an explosion of data that's available for these models to train on. Just think about the internet, the code that's available out there, financial documents. There is so much content available for these large language models. And then we're able to supplement them with context-specific content that we are providing, we, the end users. The ease of use has ramped up significantly. Now that we're able to process natural language, it has reduced the skill level needed to interact with generative AI. In fact, anyone can use them. I've been working with my 4th grader recently on using Gen AI. Now more than ever, there is clear return on investment in areas like reconciliations, variance analysis, cash visibility. With clear ROI, the arguments for adopting AI solutions are becoming much more compelling and hard to argue with. We're seeing massive increases in computing power that's available, as we discussed earlier. It's really been a huge breakthrough, and we should expect to see more and more of that in the future. We think about security and enterprise-grade security and privacy models that are running behind the scenes. Companies can ensure that LLMs that they subscribe to are not training their models on their company's data. That's critical for everyone. And then agentic AI, the ability to automate tasks, not just have a questions and answers function. We're really just scratching the surface with what's possible in this area. And so what we're seeing is AI is being discussed every single day, from water cooler conversations to social media to news outlets. But is it all hype? Let's take a closer look. So some of the things that we're hearing today is that AI is going to replace entire teams. People think that AI is so powerful that companies won't need accountants, analysts, or treasury teams anymore. This belief really comes from sensational media headlines, not real-world implementations. We're hearing that AI works autonomously without any sort of guardrails. People think that they can turn it on and it's going to magically solve all of their problems without providing any context. And what's going to happen there is that it may produce hallucinations, leading to policy violations, and having the AI even advocate for incorrect decisions. There's also the idea that AI can fully understand your business processes with little to no training. So with that, the understanding that, yes, of course, AI is smart, it's intelligent. It must automatically know our processes, our rules, our terminology, when in reality, it has a very strong baseline of general knowledge, but no model inherently understands your business. So in reality, AI does excel with structured prompts and processes with clear constraints. Later in this course, we're going to look at the strategies for structuring those prompts to get the absolute best outputs. AI still requires context. It needs to understand your business policies, your data, your rules. And without this, it's going to give you a generalized response that's less specific, or worse, incorrect. Now don't worry, humans are still essential to address subjectivity and decision making. Think about approvals, risk checks, just the handling of exceptions. And this is what I referred to earlier as human in the loop, or HITL. And we're going to cover more of the definition behind that in our next chapter. So to summarize what we've covered in chapter 2, automation has come a long way in the last 20 years. We've come from rule-based workflows to RPA to now large language models and AI agents. We've had numerous breakthroughs that have had a significant impact on finance and treasury teams as we think about cash flow automation, closing the books faster, detection of risk, and leveraging of AI copilots, not chatbots. Many reasons for accelerated adoption that we're seeing today. Really broader adoption is driven by ease of use, the idea that we can interact with the tool with natural language, and the increasingly obvious return on investment when it comes to AI. Now, there is still a lot of hype, and despite all of the progress made, we continue to see that. And we need to stay grounded in reality. AI is not going to replace entire teams, but linking that human in the loop process with AI is going to make for a very powerful combination. In our next chapter, we're going to cover AI terminology for rookies. So some of the terms that I've mentioned in chapter 2, we're going to cover at a greater depth in chapter 3. We're going to cover those core concepts of AI. We're going to look at what it means to be deterministic versus non-deterministic. We're going to cover the definition of generative AI and practical examples. We're going to do the same for agentic AI. And then because there are so many new terms and acronyms out there, we're going to cover some other useful terminology as well. With that, congratulations, you've successfully completed this module. I will see you in chapter 3. Thank you.